The dust swirled around Helena Garrett's worn boots as she stood in the town square of Helena, Montana. Her Bible clutched against her chest while the townspeople laughed at her impassioned words about forgiveness and redemption, their mockery cutting deeper than any knife could have managed in that sweltering summer of 1878. "You hear that, boys?" called out Samuel Hutchins, the saloon owner, his belly shaking with each guffaw. "Miss Garrett here thinks we ought to turn the other cheek when them cattle rustlers come through. Maybe we should invite them for Sunday supper too." The crowd erupted in laughter again, and Helena felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. She had only been trying to share what she believed, what had sustained her through the death of her parents 3 years prior, when cholera had swept through their homestead. Her faith was all she had left, the foundation upon which she had rebuilt her shattered life. She worked as a seamstress now, living in a small room above the general store, spending her evenings reading scripture by candlelight and her Sundays attempting to share hope with anyone who would listen. "Maybe she thinks Jesus will stop bullets with his bare hands," shouted another voice from the crowd. Helena opened her mouth to respond, to explain that she was not suggesting they leave themselves defenseless, only that hatred and vengeance would poison their souls more surely than any outlaw's bullet could harm their bodies. But the words caught in her throat as she saw the circle of hostile faces surrounding her. These were people she sewed dresses for, mended shirts for, greeted pleasantly each morning. Yet here they stood, united in their contempt for what she held most dear. "That is enough." The voice cut through the jeering like a whip crack, low and steady and absolutely commanding. Helena turned to see a tall man pushing through the crowd. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, his leather chaps scarred from years of hard riding, his hat pulled low over eyes that seemed to assess everything in a single glance. A gun belt hung at his hip, well worn but clearly maintained. He moved with the economical grace of someone who had spent more time in a saddle than in any parlor. "This is none of your concern, Bennett," Samuel Hutchins said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier bravado. "I am making it my concern." The cowboy, Bennett, stepped directly beside Helena, his presence solid and protective. "Miss Garrett has every right to speak her mind without being treated like a carnival attraction." "She is preaching nonsense," someone called from the back of the crowd. "She is speaking what she believes." Bennett's voice remained calm but carried an edge of steel. "Last I checked, that was still permitted in this country. Or did Montana Territory suddenly decide otherwise?" The crowd began to shift uncomfortably. Helena noticed that Bennett was not just any cowboy. His presence commanded respect, the kind that came from proven capability rather than bluster. Men who had been laughing moments before now looked away or found sudden interest in their boots. "Come on, Miss Garrett." Bennett turned to her, and for the first time she saw his face clearly beneath the shadow of his hat brim. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw and eyes the color of storm clouds. A thin scar traced along his left cheekbone, giving him a dangerous look that was somehow softened by the gentleness in his expression as he regarded her. "Let me walk you home." Helena hesitated, her pride warring with her gratitude. She had never needed a man to rescue her, had survived these past 3 years through her own determination and skill with a needle. But the continued hostility radiating from the crowd made her reconsider. She nodded once, keeping her chin high as she allowed Bennett to escort her through the parting mass of people. They walked in silence for several minutes, their footsteps echoing on the wooden boardwalk. Helena kept her Bible pressed against her chest like a shield, her heart still hammering from the confrontation. She could feel Bennett's presence beside her, steady and unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world and no particular destination in mind. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You did not have to do that." "No, I did not have to," Bennett's response was matter of fact, "but I wanted to." "Why?" Helena stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "You do not even know me." Bennett met her gaze directly, and she saw no pity there, no condescension, only a quiet respect that made something in her chest tighten. "I know enough. I have seen you around town these past few months. You are kind to everyone, even those who mock you. You work hard. You live according to your beliefs, even when it would be easier not to. That takes more courage than most people possess." Helena felt tears prick at her eyes, though she blinked them back fiercely. She could not remember the last time someone had spoken to her with such straightforward appreciation. "Most people think I am foolish. Most people confuse weakness with kindness." Bennett resumed walking, adjusting his pace to match hers. "They are not the same thing. Your strength is what I admire most." The word struck Helena like a physical blow, so unexpected and sincere that she stumbled slightly. Bennett's hand shot out to steady her elbow, his touch brief but warm through the thin fabric of her sleeve. She found herself looking at him with new curiosity, wondering who this man was who could see something in her that the rest of Helena, Montana, seemed determined to ridicule. "I am Marcus Bennett," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "I work for the Circle Bar Ranch about 10 miles north of town. Been there for 5 years now, ever since I drifted up from Texas." "Helena Garrett," she replied, though he clearly already knew her name. "I am a seamstress. I know. You repaired a shirt for me about 2 months back. I tore it on barbed wire, and you mended it so well I could barely see where the rip had been." Marcus smiled slightly, transforming his serious face into something almost boyish. "I wanted to thank you then, but you were busy with customers." They had reached the general store now, and Helena paused at the exterior staircase that led to her upstairs room. She turned to face Marcus, studying him more carefully in the golden afternoon light. He was handsome in a weathered, authentic way, with the lean strength of someone who earned his living through physical labor. But it was his eyes that captivated her, the intelligence and depth she saw there suggesting a man of substance beneath the dusty exterior. "Would you like to come up for coffee?" The invitation escaped before Helena could reconsider it, and she immediately felt her cheeks flush. "I mean, as a thank you for what you did back there." Marcus's expression softened. "I would like that very much." Helena's room was small but impeccably neat, with a narrow bed in one corner, a workbench covered with sewing supplies, and a tiny stove where she prepared her simple meals. She busied herself making coffee, acutely aware of Marcus's presence filling the confined space. He removed his hat and stood by the single window, looking out over Main Street while giving her time to compose herself. "How long have you been in Helena?" Marcus asked as she poured coffee into 2 mismatched cups. 3 years. I came here after my parents died. They had a homestead about 30 miles east, but I could not manage it alone. I sold what I could and moved here to start fresh." Helena handed him a cup, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "What brought you north from Texas?" Marcus took a sip of coffee before answering, his gaze distant. "War, family trouble, the usual reasons men move on. My father and I did not see eye to eye on much of anything. After the war ended and I came home, things just got worse, so I packed what little I owned and started riding. Ended up here and found work at the Circle Bar. Mr. Thompson, the owner, he is a fair man, treats his hands well, I have no complaints." "Do you miss Texas?" Helena settled into her only chair, leaving Marcus the stool from her workbench. "Sometimes. Mostly I miss the idea of home more than the actual place." Marcus sat down carefully, cradling the coffee cup in his calloused hands. Truth is, I have felt more at home here in Montana than I ever did in Texas. The land is different, harder in some ways, but it is honest. You know where you stand. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing with surprising ease. Helena found herself telling Marcus about her faith, how she had found it not in some dramatic revelation, but in the quiet moments after her parents' deaths, when she had been utterly alone and desperate for something to hold on to. She explained that her beliefs were not about judgment or superiority, but about finding meaning in suffering and choosing hope over despair. Marcus listened without interruption, his full attention on her words. When she finally fell silent, suddenly self-conscious about how much she had revealed, he set down his coffee cup and leaned forward slightly. "I grew up going to church every Sunday," he said quietly. "My mother was devout, believed in prayer and providence and all of it. My father went through the motions but did not believe any of it really mattered. He figured a man made his own way in the world, and God was just something weak people invented to feel better about their sorry lot." Marcus paused, his jaw tightening. "After my mother died when I was 15, my father used that as proof. Said if God existed and cared, he would not have taken the one truly good person in our family." "What do you believe?" Helena asked softly. Marcus looked at her directly, and she saw complex emotions swirling in those gray eyes. "I think I have spent the last 10 years trying to figure that out. I have seen too much cruelty to believe the world is inherently good. But I have also seen enough kindness, enough beauty, to think there must be something bigger than us behind it all. Watching you today, standing in that square with everyone mocking you but refusing to back down from what you believe, that felt like truth to me. Maybe not the kind I can explain or defend, but the kind I recognize when I see it." Helena felt something shift in her chest, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. Here was a man who understood the struggle between doubt and faith, who did not pretend to have all the answers but was willing to keep searching for them. The connection she felt to Marcus in that moment was unlike anything she had experienced before, a recognition of kindred spirits finding each other in an unlikely place. "I should go," Marcus said, though he made no move to stand. "I need to get back to the ranch before dark. But I would like to see you again if you would permit it." "I would like that," Helena replied, meaning it completely. Marcus stood then, retrieving his hat from where he had set it on the windowsill. At the door, he paused and turned back to her. "Miss Garrett, Helena, do not let those people make you doubt yourself. The world needs more people willing to believe in something bigger than themselves, not fewer. What you are doing takes real courage." After he left, Helena stood at her window and watched him walk down Main Street toward where his horse was tied outside the saloon. Several men called out to him as he passed, and she saw him nod politely but continue on without stopping. There was something solitary about Marcus Bennett, she realized, something that matched her own isolation. Perhaps that was why she had felt such an immediate connection to him. The following Sunday, Helena was surprised to see Marcus sitting in the back pew of the small church where she attended services. The congregation was never large, perhaps 20 people on a good day, made up mostly of older women and a few families. Reverend John Walsh, an elderly man who had come west as a missionary 30 years prior, delivered sermons that were more rambling than inspiring, but Helena appreciated his genuine faith and gentle demeanor. After the service, Marcus waited while Helena spoke with Reverend Walsh about organizing a quilting circle to make blankets for families in need. When she finally emerged from the church, Marcus was leaning against the hitching post, his horse standing patiently beside him. "I did not expect to see you here," Helena said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "Figured I would see what all the fuss was about." Marcus fell into step beside her as they began walking toward the center of town. "Reverend Walsh seems like a good man." "He is. He has been very kind to me since I arrived in Helena." Helena adjusted her shawl against the cool morning air. "What did you think of the service?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think faith looks different on different people. For Reverend Walsh, it is gentle and forgiving. For you, it is strong and determined. I respect both approaches." They walked together through the quiet Sunday streets, and Helena felt a contentment she had not experienced in years. Marcus told her stories about life on the ranch, about the horses he worked with, and the vast stretches of Montana grassland that seemed to go on forever. She told him about the dresses she was making for the mayor's daughters, about her dreams of one day opening her own shop where she could employ other women who needed work. It became a pattern over the following weeks. Marcus would ride into town whenever his work permitted, which was usually once or twice a week. Sometimes they would walk together. Sometimes they would sit in Helena's small room drinking coffee and talking for hours. Other times, Marcus would help her with errands, carrying heavy bolts of fabric from the freight office or repairing the loose board on her stairs that the landlord kept promising to fix, but never did. The townspeople noticed, of course. Helena could feel their eyes following them whenever they appeared together in public. The whispers started almost immediately. Some were curious, others disapproving. Samuel Hutchins made a point of warning Marcus that he was wasting his time on a woman who cared more about heaven than earth, who would probably expect him to give up drinking and gambling and everything that made life worth living. Marcus had looked at the saloon owner with cool disdain and replied that he had never been much for gambling anyway, and he found Helena's company more intoxicating than any whiskey could ever be. The story spread through town within hours, and Helena found herself smiling every time she thought about it, but not everyone was amused by their growing relationship. One evening in late September, as Helena was closing up her sewing room for the night, there was a harsh knock at her door. She opened it to find Catherine Walsh, the Reverend's wife, standing in the hallway with a pinched expression on her face. "Mrs. Walsh, what a pleasant surprise. Please come in." Helena stepped aside, but the older woman remained in the doorway. "I will not stay long. I came to speak with you about a matter of some concern." Catherine's voice was prim and disapproving. "It has come to my attention that you have been keeping company with Marcus Bennett." "Yes, Marcus and I are friends." Helena kept her tone neutral, though she felt a defensive anger beginning to rise in her chest. "Friends." Catherine repeated the word as if it tasted sour. "My dear, people are talking. It is not proper for an unmarried woman to spend so much time alone with a man, regardless of intentions. You are already viewed with suspicion by many in this town due to your, shall we say, enthusiastic expressions of faith. Adding scandal to that reputation will only make things worse." Helena felt her hands clench at her sides. "There is no scandal, Mrs. Walsh. Marcus has been nothing but respectful. He is a good man. He is a drifter with a gun on his hip and no family to speak of. You know nothing about his past or his character beyond what he chooses to show you." Catherine's expression softened slightly, though her eyes remained hard. "I say this out of concern for you, Helena. You are a young woman alone in the world. You cannot afford to be careless with your reputation." After Catherine left, Helena sat on her bed and stared at the wall, feeling the weight of judgment pressing down on her once again. She had been so happy these past weeks, so grateful to have found someone who understood her. But now that joy was being poisoned by gossip and small-mindedness. When Marcus came to visit 2 days later, Helena was quiet and withdrawn. He noticed immediately, setting down the wildflowers he had brought her and sitting beside her on the workbench stool. What happened? His voice was gentle but concerned. Helena told him about Catherine Walsh's visit, about the whispers and warnings. As she spoke, she watched Marcus's expression darken. "You want me to stay away?" he asked finally. "If my presence is making your life more difficult, I will respect that." "No." The word came out more forcefully than Helena intended. She reached out and grasped Marcus's hand, feeling the roughness of his calluses against her palm. "I do not want you to stay away. I am just tired of being judged for everything I do. I try to live according to my faith and people mock me. I find happiness with you and they call it scandal. Nothing I do is ever right in their eyes." Marcus turned his hand over so their fingers could intertwine properly. "Then stop trying to please them. Live for yourself and for what you believe is right. The opinions of small-minded people do not matter." "Easy to say," Helena replied, but she smiled despite herself. "Not easy at all, actually. I have spent most of my life caring too much what my father thought of me, trying to prove I was worth his respect. It took leaving Texas entirely to finally understand that his opinion did not define my worth." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Helena. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, hands still clasped, watching the afternoon light fade through the small window. Helena felt the tightness in her chest begin to ease. Whatever judgment the town wanted to heap on her, she had this connection with someone who truly saw her and valued who she was. "Tell me about Texas," she said suddenly. "Tell me about your family." Marcus was quiet for so long that Helena thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful, as if he were picking his way through dangerous territory. "My father owned a ranch outside of San Antonio. Not as big as some, but substantial. He built it from nothing, started with 100 head of cattle and turned it into a real operation. He was proud of that and he expected me to be equally devoted to it." Marcus paused, his thumb tracing absent patterns on the back of Helena's hand. "But I was never the son he wanted. I liked books and thinking too much. I asked questions about why we did things certain ways instead of just following orders. After my mother died, the ranch was all my father cared about. I was just a disappointment." "I am sure that is not true," Helena said softly. "It is true. He told me as much more than once. Said I was weak like my mother, too soft for the hard work of building something that mattered." Marcus's jaw tightened. "When the war came, I enlisted partially to get away from him. Served 4 years, saw things I wish I could forget. When I came home, I thought maybe things would be different. But my father just saw more proof that I was not cut out for the life he wanted me to lead. We fought constantly. Finally, one night he told me that if I was not going to commit to the ranch, I should just leave. So I did." "Have you been in contact with him since?" Helena asked. "No. For all I know, he is dead, or maybe he is thriving without me there to disappoint him." Marcus's voice was bitter. "I told myself I did not care either way, but I think about him sometimes, wonder if he ever regrets the things he said." Helena shifted closer to Marcus, still holding his hand. "My parents were not perfect, but they loved me. When they died, I felt unmoored, like I had lost the only people who truly understood me. I cannot imagine growing up feeling unloved by the people who were supposed to care for you most. I do not think my father was incapable of love. I just think his version of it was harsh and conditional. You had to earn it through obedience and success." Marcus looked at Helena directly then, his gray eyes intense. "Being with you these past weeks has shown me what it could be like to be accepted for who I am, not who someone wants me to be. That is a gift I did not know I was missing." Helena felt tears gathering in her eyes, overwhelmed by the vulnerability Marcus was showing her. She released his hand only to wrap her arms around him, pulling him into an embrace that he returned with surprising fierceness. They held each other as the room grew darker, neither speaking, both drawing comfort from the simple fact of not being alone. As October arrived and the Montana weather began to turn cold, Marcus and Helena's relationship deepened into something neither of them could deny was love. Marcus had never been one for flowery declarations, but his actions spoke volumes. He brought her firewood to keep her room warm and ensured her stove was working properly. He walked her home from church every Sunday and waited patiently while she completed her errands. When a drunk cowhand started harassing her outside the general store one evening, Marcus appeared seemingly from nowhere and persuaded the man to apologize and move along, all without raising his voice or his fists. For her part, Helena found herself thinking about Marcus constantly. She would be in the middle of sewing a hem and realize she was smiling for no reason other than remembering something he had said. She started keeping cookies in a tin for his visits and made sure she always had coffee ready. When he mentioned casually that his winter coat was threadbare, she spent 3 evenings secretly making him a new one from sturdy wool fabric, lined with warm flannel. When she presented it to him, Marcus had looked at the coat for a long moment before meeting her eyes. "You made this for me. The nights are getting cold. I did not want you to freeze on your rides back to the ranch." Helena felt suddenly shy, wondering if she had overstepped. Marcus put on the coat immediately, and Helena could see that her measurements had been perfect. It fit him as if it had been tailored specifically for him, which of course it had been. He ran his hands down the front, feeling the quality of her work, then looked at her with such tenderness that Helena felt her breath catch. "No one has ever made me anything before," he said quietly. "Thank you." That night, standing in her small room with Marcus wearing the coat she had made him, Helena felt the last of her defenses crumble. She loved this man, loved his strength and his gentleness, his complicated past and his honest present. She loved the way he listened when she talked about her faith and asked thoughtful questions instead of dismissing her beliefs. She loved how he made her feel safe and valued and seen. "Marcus," she began, but he stepped forward and cupped her face in his hands, looking at her with such intensity that the words died in her throat. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it is too soon, and I am not the kind of man you probably imagined for yourself, but I love you, Helena. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." "I love you too," Helena whispered, and then Marcus was kissing her, soft and careful and full of restrained passion. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his new coat, feeling like she was falling and flying simultaneously. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I do not have much to offer except myself and a promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you, but I want to build a life with you, Helena. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to support your faith even when I struggle with my own. I want everything with you." "Yes," Helena said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in Reverend Walsh's small church, with about 30 people in attendance. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and Helena wore a dress she had sewn herself from ivory silk she had been saving for years. Marcus wore a proper suit borrowed from Mr. Thompson, his ranch boss, who attended with his wife and served as a witness. Not everyone in town approved, of course. Samuel Hutchins made snide comments about how long the marriage would last, once Helena tried to reform Marcus into a proper Christian husband. Catherine Walsh maintained her disapproving silence, though Reverend Walsh himself seemed genuinely happy for them. But Helena found that she did not care about the naysayers anymore. She had Marcus, she had her faith, and she had hope for their future together. That was enough. They spent their wedding night in Helena's small room above the general store, which would serve as their home until they could afford better. Marcus was tender and patient with Helena, understanding her nervousness, and taking his time to make her feel cherished and safe. Afterward, lying in his arms in the narrow bed, Helena felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. "I never thought I would be this happy," she murmured against his chest. Marcus pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Neither did I. I was resigned to being alone, figured it was what I deserved after leaving my father the way I did. But you changed everything." "Do you regret leaving Texas?" Helena asked. "Not for a single moment. If I had stayed, I never would have found you." Marcus shifted so he could look at her face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "You are my home now, Helena. Wherever you are is where I belong." The first months of their marriage were not without challenges. Money was tight, as Marcus's wages from the Circle Bar Ranch were modest, and Helena's sewing work was inconsistent. They lived frugally, spending little on themselves and saving what they could toward the dream of eventually buying their own small piece of land. The bigger challenge came from Helena's continued desire to share her faith with the community. She organized the quilting circle as planned, but struggled to find women willing to participate. She helped Reverend Walsh with various church projects, but attendance at services continued to dwindle. Some townspeople seemed to view her marriage to Marcus as proof that her faith had been performative all along, that she had just been looking for a husband like any other woman. One Sunday in December, after a particularly discouraging service where only 12 people had shown up, Helena sat in the church pew and cried. Marcus, who had taken to attending services every week to support her, sat beside her and waited patiently for the storm of emotion to pass. "I do not understand," Helena said when she could speak again. "I am trying to help people, to offer them hope and community. Why do they resist so strongly?" "Because you are challenging them," Marcus replied thoughtfully. "You are suggesting that there is more to life than work and survival and Friday night at the saloon. That makes people uncomfortable, forces them to examine whether they are satisfied with their lives. It is easier to mock you than to consider that you might be offering something they are missing." Helena wiped her eyes with her handkerchief. "Maybe I am going about this all wrong. Maybe I need to find a different approach. Or maybe you just need to be patient. Change does not happen overnight, especially in a place like Helena where people are set in their ways." Marcus took her hand. "But I will tell you what I see. I see a woman who lives according to her principles even when it is hard. I see someone who shows up every week to worship even though the congregation is small. I see genuine faith, not the performative kind that collapses at the first obstacle. That matters, Helena, even if you cannot see the impact yet." His words helped, as they always did. Helena leaned against her husband's shoulder and allowed herself to draw strength from his presence. She had wanted to change the world, or at least their small corner of it. But perhaps Marcus was right. Perhaps the real work was simply living authentically and trusting that her example would speak louder than any sermon. Winter settled over Montana with fierce determination, bringing snow and bitter cold that made life difficult for everyone. Marcus continued riding to the ranch each day, leaving before dawn and returning after dark, coming home exhausted and half-frozen despite the coat Helena had made him. Helena spent her days sewing and trying to keep their small room warm, using rags to plug the gaps around the window frame and rationing their firewood carefully. In January, Marcus came home with news that would change everything. Mr. Thompson, the Circle Bar owner, had decided to sell off a portion of his land, parcels of about 160 acres each, to his most trusted hands. He was offering Marcus first opportunity to purchase one of these parcels at a very fair price, with the option to pay over time. "It is good land," Marcus explained, his eyes bright with excitement as he showed Helena the rough map Mr. Thompson had drawn. "There is water from a creek, good grass for cattle, some timber for building. We could build a small cabin, start our own herd. It would be hard work, but we could make something real, Helena, something that belongs to us." Helena studied the map, her heart racing. It was everything they had talked about in whispered conversations late at night, the dream of having their own place where they could build a life together. But it was also terrifying. They would be leaving the relative security of Marcus's steady wages and Helena's sewing work for the uncertainty of ranching. "How much would we need for the down payment?" she asked. Marcus named a figure that was substantial but not impossible. Between their savings and the money Helena could get from selling her sewing equipment, they would have enough. "Barely. We would be taking a significant risk," Helena said slowly. "If the cattle do not thrive or if we have a bad winter, we could lose everything." "That is true." Marcus sat beside her at their small table. "But we would lose it together. And honestly, I believe we can make this work. I know ranching, I know this land. And you are the strongest, most determined person I have ever met. If anyone can succeed at this, it is us." Helena looked at her husband's face, saw the hope and determination there, and felt her own courage rising to meet his. They had faced mockery and judgment and hardship since the day they met. They had built a marriage on faith and love and mutual respect. Why should they not take this chance to build something more? "Let us do it," she said. "Let us build our ranch." The next 3 months were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus worked with Mr. Thompson to finalize the land purchase and began making plans for their cabin. Helena sold her sewing supplies to a woman who was moving to Helena from Butte and spent her days helping Marcus prepare for the move. They bought a dozen head of cattle, 2 horses beyond Marcus's gelding, some chickens, and the basic supplies they would need to start their homestead. In April, when the weather finally began to warm and the snow started melting, they loaded their possessions into a borrowed wagon and made the journey to their new land. It was about 15 miles north of Helena, nestled in a valley with the creek Marcus had mentioned running along one border. The grass was beginning to green up, and Helena could see the potential in the rolling terrain. "What should we call it?" she asked as they stood together surveying their property. Marcus considered the question seriously. "What about Hope Creek Ranch?" "Since the creek is our water source and hope is what brought us here." Helena smiled, thinking how fitting it was that their ranch would be named for the very thing her faith was built upon. "Hope Creek Ranch," she repeated. "I love it." They lived in a tent for the first 6 weeks while Marcus built their cabin. Helena helped where she could, though she quickly discovered that her skills with a needle did not translate to carpentry. Instead, she focused on establishing a garden, caring for their chickens, and learning the basics of managing cattle from Marcus. It was backbreaking work, and there were days when Helena wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. Her hands, once smooth from sewing, became calloused and rough. Her back ached from hauling water and digging in the garden. She was exhausted every night and up before dawn every morning. But there was also a profound satisfaction in this life that Helena had never experienced before. She was building something tangible, something that would last. When she looked at the cabin taking shape under Marcus's skilled hands, when she saw the green shoots emerging in her garden, when she collected eggs from their chickens. She felt a sense of accomplishment that no amount of perfectly sewn dresses had ever provided. Marcus thrived in ways Helena had not anticipated. Away from the structure of working for someone else, he blossomed into a confident, capable rancher. He had a natural instinct for the land and the animals, knowing when to move the cattle to fresh grass and how to handle the inevitable problems that arose. He worked from before dawn until well after dark most days, but he always made time for Helena, always ensured she felt valued and appreciated. One evening in late May, as they sat outside their nearly completed cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Helena felt Marcus's hand find hers. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. Helena considered the question seriously. She was tired and sore, her dress was stained with dirt and grass, and she could not remember the last time she had looked presentable by town standards. But she was sitting beside the man she loved on land they owned together, building a future with their own hands. "Yes," she said, "I am happy." "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." Marcus brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for taking this chance with me." "Thank you for seeing something in me worth admiring," Helena replied, "for believing in my strength when everyone else saw weakness." They sat together as the stars began to emerge, neither feeling the need to fill the comfortable silence with words. Helena thought about how far she had come from that day in the town square when the townspeople had mocked her faith. She had found not just love but partnership, not just acceptance but genuine appreciation for who she was. By July, they had settled into a rhythm at Hope Creek Ranch. The cabin was complete, small but sturdy, with a main room that served as kitchen and living space and a separate bedroom. Helena had made curtains for the windows and a quilt for their bed, adding small touches of comfort to their rough surroundings. The garden was producing vegetables, supplementing the beans and salt pork that made up most of their diet. The cattle were thriving on the summer grass, and Marcus had even managed to buy 6 more head at a good price from a rancher who was moving back east. Helena had worried that living so far from town would mean complete isolation, but she found that she did not miss the social aspects of Helena as much as she thought she would. Marcus was her companion and friend as well as her husband, and their evenings together were filled with conversation and quiet contentment. Once every 2 weeks or so, they would make the trip into town for supplies and to attend church services, but Helena no longer felt the urgent need to prove herself to the townspeople. She had found her purpose here at the ranch. That is not to say her faith had diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger and more personal. She prayed each morning and evening, thanking God for the blessings of land and love and purpose. She read her Bible by firelight and found new meaning in passages about seeds and harvest, about building on solid foundations. Her relationship with the divine had become less about public testimony and more about private devotion. Marcus noticed the change in her. "You seem more at peace," he observed one evening as they sat together on the porch he had built at the front of the cabin. "I think I was so focused on convincing others that my faith mattered that I forgot to simply live it," Helena replied. "Out here, there is no one to perform for, no one to convince. I can just be who I am and trust that is enough." "It is more than enough," Marcus assured her. "You are everything I could have hoped for and so much more." In August, Helena discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually as her monthly courses stopped and she began feeling queasy in the mornings. At first, she attributed it to something she had eaten or perhaps exhaustion from the hard work of ranch life. But as the symptoms persisted and her body began changing in subtle ways, the truth became undeniable. She told Marcus one evening after supper, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. They had not specifically discussed children, though both had assumed they would come eventually. But they were still establishing the ranch, still figuring out how to make ends meet. Was this the right time to add a baby to the mix? Marcus's expression moved through surprise to wonder to pure joy in the space of about 3 seconds. He pulled Helena into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Helena asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Marcus pulled back so he could look at her face. "Happy, Helena, I am thrilled. Terrified, but thrilled. We are going to be parents." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about how they would need to add onto the cabin before the baby arrived, discussing names and wondering whether they would have a son or daughter. Marcus was adamant that Helena should reduce her workload, that she should not be hauling water or doing heavy lifting in her condition. Helena argued that women had been having babies while doing hard work since the beginning of time, but she agreed to be more careful. As her pregnancy progressed through the fall, Helena found herself marveling at the changes in her body and spirit. She had always thought of herself as strong and capable, but this was a different kind of strength, the ability to create life itself. She prayed constantly for the health of her baby, for wisdom to be a good mother, for Marcus to be protected as he worked to provide for their growing family. Marcus was attentive and affectionate in ways that made Helena fall in love with him all over again. He built an addition onto the cabin for the baby's room, working late into the night by lamplight to ensure it would be ready in time. He brought her wildflowers when he came in from working with the cattle. He rubbed her aching feet and lower back without complaint. When her ankles swelled and she felt ungainly and unattractive, he told her she had never been more beautiful. In October, they made a trip to Helena to stock up on supplies before winter set in. Helena was 5 months along now, her pregnancy visible to anyone who looked. She felt self-conscious walking down Main Street, aware of the stares and whispers following them. They were loading their purchases into the wagon when Catherine Walsh approached, her expression less pinched than Helena remembered. The older woman looked at Helena's belly, then met her eyes. "I heard you and your husband were expecting. Congratulations." The words were stiff but seemed genuine. "Thank you, Mrs. Walsh," Helena replied, surprised by the gesture. "I also heard you have a ranch north of town. My husband and I have been praying for your success." Catherine paused, then continued with visible effort. "I owe you an apology, Helena. I judged you harshly when you were keeping company with Marcus. I thought you were being reckless and foolish, but it is clear that you have built a good life together. I was wrong to assume otherwise." Helena felt tears prick her eyes, hormones making her more emotional than usual. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." After Catherine walked away, Marcus put his arm around Helena's shoulders. "That must feel good, getting an apology after all this time." "It does," Helena admitted. "Though I think I stopped needing her approval a while ago. Still, it is nice to be acknowledged." They returned to Hope Creek Ranch as the first snow of the season began to fall, and Helena felt the deep satisfaction of coming home. This land, this cabin, this life they had built together, this was where she belonged. Winter arrived in earnest in November, bringing heavy snows that sometimes left them isolated for days at a time. Marcus worked constantly to keep the cattle alive, breaking ice on the creek so they could drink, hauling hay he had cut and stored during the summer to supplement their grazing. Helena stayed inside mostly, keeping the cabin warm and preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes from fabric scraps, made soft blankets, prepared diapers. Marcus carved a wooden cradle, sanding it smooth and lining it with padding Helena created. They talked about the future, about how they would raise this child to be strong and kind, faithful but not judgmental, capable of both hard work and deep thinking. "I want our child to know they are loved unconditionally," Marcus said one evening as they lay in bed, his hand resting on Helena's rounded belly. "Not the way my father loved me with conditions and expectations, but true love, the kind that does not have to be earned." "They will know," Helena promised. "We will make sure they know." The baby arrived on a bitter cold night in February 1879. Helena's labor started in the afternoon, and Marcus rode through a snowstorm to fetch Mrs. Thompson, the ranch owner's wife, who had experience with birthing babies. The two of them helped Helena through the long hours of labor, Marcus holding her hand and offering encouragement while Mrs. Thompson provided practical guidance. Just before dawn, Helena gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Marcus wept openly when the midwife placed the infant in his arms, looking down at his son with an expression of pure wonder. "He is perfect," Marcus whispered. "Helena, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Henry Marcus Bennett after Helena's father and his own middle name. Little Henry had a strong set of lungs and a head full of dark hair. Helena held him against her chest and felt a love so fierce it almost frightened her in its intensity. This small person, this child she and Marcus had created together, represented everything good in the world. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Henry was a demanding baby, wanting to nurse constantly and sleeping only in short stretches. Helena was tired all the time, her body recovering from birth while adjusting to the demands of caring for an infant. Marcus helped whenever he could, walking Henry around the cabin when he was fussy, changing diapers, bringing Helena food and water while she nursed. But despite the exhaustion, Helena had never felt more fulfilled. She would look at Henry nursing at her breast or sleeping in his cradle and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. This life she had built, this family she had found, it was everything she had never known to pray for. As spring arrived and Henry grew stronger and more alert, Helena began to emerge from the fog of new motherhood. She resumed helping more with the ranch work, wearing Henry in a sling Marcus fashioned for her, so she could have her hands free while keeping the baby close. Marcus had built a small addition to the cabin that served as Helena's workroom, and she began sewing again, not for money but for the simple pleasure of creating something beautiful. One Sunday in April, they made the trip into Helena for church services, bringing Henry with them. Helena felt nervous about how the townspeople would react, remembering the mockery she had endured in that town square 2 years earlier. But to her surprise, people were warm and welcoming, cooing over Henry and congratulating her and Marcus on their son. After the service, several women approached Helena about resuming the quilting circle she had tried to organize before. They wanted to make quilts for families in need, and they hoped Helena would teach them her techniques. Helena agreed, surprised and touched by their interest. "Things change," Reverend Walsh told her as she was leaving. "You planted seeds when you first came to Helena, even if you could not see them growing. Now they are bearing fruit." Helena thought about his words on the ride home, Henry asleep in her arms while Marcus drove the wagon. Perhaps the Reverend was right. Perhaps her witness had not been in vain after all. She had lived according to her beliefs even when it was unpopular, had maintained her faith through mockery and hardship. And now, unexpectedly, people were responding to that example. Over the next year, Hope Creek Ranch continued to grow and prosper. Marcus's skill as a rancher became evident as their herd increased and thrived. They sold cattle at good prices and used the money to make improvements to the ranch, building a proper barn and buying more livestock. Helena's quilting circle met monthly, and she found herself developing genuine friendships with women who had previously viewed her with suspicion. Henry grew into a bright, energetic toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. Marcus was a devoted father, patient and playful, clearly determined to give his son the childhood he himself had never experienced. He taught Henry about the animals and the land, showed him how to be gentle with the chickens and respectful of the horses. Helena would watch them together and feel her heart swell with love. In the summer of 1880, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less surprising but no less joyful. Marcus was thrilled at the prospect of expanding their family, though he worried about Helena managing both a toddler and a newborn. "We will figure it out," Helena assured him. "People have been raising multiple children for thousands of years. We will manage." Their second child, a daughter they named Grace Catherine Bennett, arrived in February 1881, exactly 2 years after Henry's birth. She was smaller than her brother had been, with wispy blonde hair and blue eyes that would eventually turn hazel like Helena's. Henry was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from changing diapers to singing her lullabies. Life with 2 young children was chaotic and demanding, but Helena thrived in ways she never had before. She had found her purpose not just in faith or work, but in family. The love she shared with Marcus had expanded to encompass their children, creating a foundation of security and belonging that sustained them all. One evening in the spring of 1882, as Helena sat on the porch watching Marcus teach Henry how to throw a rope while Grace slept in her lap, she reflected on how drastically her life had changed in just 4 years. She had gone from a lonely seamstress mocked for her beliefs to a wife and mother living on a thriving ranch. She had found love with a man who valued her strength, had created a family filled with joy and purpose. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, coming to sit beside her after Henry ran off to practice his roping skills on a fence post. "How blessed we are," Helena replied. "How far we have come." Marcus put his arm around her shoulders, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "Do you ever miss your old life? The town, the sewing, even the church work?" Helena considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, and I miss being able to walk to church every Sunday. But I do not miss the loneliness or the judgment. Here, I have everything that truly matters. You, our children, our home. This is where I am meant to be." "I think about my father sometimes," Marcus admitted quietly. "Wonder if he is still alive, if he ever thinks about me. Part of me wants to write to him, let him know about you and the children. But I am not sure I could handle it if he rejected us all over again." Helena shifted Grace carefully and took Marcus's hand with her free one. "You do not need his approval anymore. You have built something remarkable here, something you can be proud of. You are a wonderful husband and father, a successful rancher. Whether your father acknowledges it or not does not change the truth of it. I know, but I guess I still wish things could have been different." Marcus squeezed her hand. "Which is why I am determined to be different with Henry and Grace. They will never doubt that they are loved and valued exactly as they are." "They are lucky to have you as a father," Helena said softly. As the years passed, Hope Creek Ranch became an established and respected operation in the area. Marcus's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher grew, and he began serving on the local Cattlemen's Association board. Helena continued her quilting circle and became known for her generosity and kindness, often providing meals or assistance to families in need. Henry grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved books as much as horses, while Grace was adventurous and fearless, following her father everywhere and insisting on learning to ride almost as soon as she could walk. In 1884, Helena gave birth to a third child, another son they named James Robert Bennett. The cabin had been expanded twice by then, growing into a proper house with multiple bedrooms, a real kitchen, and even a small parlor where Helena kept her sewing supplies and books. The family attended church services in Helena regularly now, making the trip most Sundays when weather permitted. Helena taught Sunday school occasionally and helped organize various church events. But her faith remained primarily personal, expressed through how she lived rather than what she preached. She had learned that the most powerful testimony was simply loving others well and maintaining integrity in all circumstances. In the summer of 1886, 8 years after their wedding, Helena and Marcus celebrated their anniversary by taking a rare trip alone, leaving the children with Mrs. Thompson for 2 nights while they traveled to a small lake about 20 miles from the ranch. They camped under the stars, cooked over an open fire, and talked for hours the way they had when they were first falling in love. "You remember the day we met?" Helena asked as they lay beside each other looking up at the night sky. "When you stepped into that crowd and defended me?" "Of course I remember. I took one look at you standing there with your chin up, refusing to back down despite everyone mocking you, and I knew you were extraordinary." Marcus turned on his side to face her. "You still take my breath away, Helena, even more now than you did then." "Why?" Helena asked, genuinely curious. "Because I have seen you face every challenge with grace and determination. I have watched you be a mother to our children with such patience and love. I have seen your faith sustain you through hard times without making you bitter or judgmental. You are exactly the woman I thought you were that first day, only now I know you even better and love you even more deeply." Helena felt tears gather in her eyes. "I never thought I would find this. After my parents died, I felt so alone in the world. I thought maybe that was my fate, to be solitary. But then you saw something in me worth admiring and everything changed." "Your strength is what I admired most," Marcus said, echoing the words he had spoken so many years before. "But now I admire so much more. Your kindness, your wisdom, your ability to make our house a home. You are my partner in every sense of the word." They made love under the stars that night, their passion deepened by years of partnership and mutual respect. And afterward, holding each other close, Helena felt profoundly grateful for the path her life had taken. The mockery she had endured in that town square had led her directly to Marcus, to this ranch, to the family and purpose she had found here. In 1888, when Henry was 9, Grace was 7, and James was 4, Helena became pregnant one final time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous ones, leaving her more tired and uncomfortable. Marcus insisted she rest as much as possible, taking over many of her usual tasks and enlisting the older children to help with household chores. Their 4th child, a daughter named Ruth, was born in December 1888. She was a calm, peaceful baby who seemed to bring a sense of serenity to their bustling household. Marcus joked that God knew they needed someone to balance out Grace's wild energy. With 4 children, the house was always full of noise and activity. Helena spent her days cooking, cleaning, teaching, and mediating disputes, while Marcus managed the ranch with increasing success. They hired a hand to help with the livestock, a young man named Peter who proved reliable and hardworking. The children thrived in the wide open spaces of Montana, learning to ride and rope and work alongside their parents. Helena's quilting circle had grown to include over a dozen women who met twice monthly. They made quilts for families in need, for newly married couples, for babies born in the area. Helena found deep satisfaction in this work, in the community of women supporting each other and creating beauty together. These were friendships built on mutual respect rather than judgment, and she treasured them. In the spring of 1890, 12 years after Helena and Marcus had first met, the town of Helena held a celebration to mark Montana's impending statehood. The whole family traveled to town for the festivities, the children excited to see the decorated streets and special events. As they walked through the crowded town square, Helena found herself standing almost exactly where she had been that day when the townspeople mocked her. She paused, memories washing over her, remembering the humiliation and isolation she had felt. "What is it?" Marcus asked, noticing her sudden stillness. "This is where we met," Helena said softly, "where you told me that my strength was what you admired most." Marcus looked around, recognition dawning on his face. "So it is. I had forgotten the exact spot." He took her hand. "Look how far we have come since then." Helena looked at their 4 children playing nearby, at the townspeople who now greeted them warmly, at the life they had built through faith and hard work and love. "We have been blessed beyond measure." "We have blessed each other," Marcus corrected gently. "Every good thing in my life traces back to you, Helena. You saved me from a life of loneliness and regret. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. You showed me what real strength looks like." That evening, as the town celebrated with music and dancing, Helena and Marcus stood together and watched their children play with other families. Henry was becoming a young man, already showing signs of his father's height and his mother's thoughtfulness. Grace was all motion and energy, laughing as she chased James around the square. Little Ruth was content in Helena's arms, watching everything with her serious blue eyes. "You think they understand how much we love them?" Marcus asked. "I think they know it in their bones," Helena replied. "The way we never got to know it as children. That is our gift to them, that certainty of being loved." Over the next several years, as Montana settled into statehood and the wild frontier gradually became more civilized, Hope Creek Ranch continued to prosper. Henry showed a talent for breeding horses and began developing a side business raising quality stock. Grace learned to manage cattle as well as any cowhand, riding fearlessly across the range. James was fascinated by mechanics and was always taking things apart to see how they worked. Ruth developed a love for plants and gardening, helping her mother expand the vegetable garden into something that supplied food for their family and provided excess to share with neighbors. Helena's faith remained the quiet foundation of her life. She prayed with her children each night, taught them Bible stories, and modeled what it meant to live according to principles of love and service. But she never forgot the mockery she had endured, and she was careful to present faith as something personal and powerful rather than something to be forced on others. Marcus's relationship with faith evolved over the years. He never became as devout as Helena, but he attended church faithfully and prayed regularly. More importantly, he lived according to principles of integrity and kindness that Helena recognized as deeply spiritual, even if Marcus himself might not have labeled them as such. In 1895, when Helena was 38 and Marcus was 41, they received an unexpected letter. It was from a lawyer in Texas, informing Marcus that his father had died and left him the ranch in San Antonio. The letter explained that his father had been looking for him for years, wanting to reconcile but unable to locate him. He had changed his will to leave everything to Marcus, his only heir, with a personal letter attached. Marcus opened the letter from his father with shaking hands while Helena stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder in support. The letter was short but devastating in its honesty. His father apologized for the harsh words and impossible expectations. He acknowledged that he had driven Marcus away with his criticism and rigidity. He expressed pride in the man he had heard Marcus had become, gathering information through various acquaintances over the years. He begged forgiveness and hoped that Marcus had found the happiness and peace that he himself had failed to achieve. When Marcus finished reading, he sat down heavily in his chair, tears streaming down his face. Helena knelt beside him and wrapped her arms around him while he wept for the relationship that might have been, for the reconciliation that had come too late. "He was proud of me," Marcus said when he could speak again. "All these years I thought he hated me, that he considered me a failure. But he was proud." "Of course he was proud," Helena said softly. "How could he not be? Look at what you have accomplished, the man you have become." They discussed what to do about the ranch in Texas. Marcus had no desire to leave Montana or the life they had built at Hope Creek Ranch. Eventually, they decided to sell the Texas property and use the money to expand their own operation and set up trust funds for their children's futures. But the letter from his father changed something in Marcus. The weight of old grief and guilt that he had carried for so long finally lifted. He could let go of the anger and hurt, could forgive his father and, more importantly, forgive himself for leaving. "I wish I could have told him about you and the children," Marcus said one night as they lay in bed. "I wish he could have met you, seen what we built together." "Maybe he knows somehow," Helena offered. "And even if he does not, you know that you built something good and lasting. You broke the cycle of harsh expectations and conditional love. That is what matters." In 1898, 20 years after their wedding, Helena and Marcus stood together on the porch of their expanded house and looked out over Hope Creek Ranch. The property had grown to over 300 acres now, supporting a substantial herd of cattle and horses. The children were growing up strong and capable, each finding their own path while remaining close as a family. Henry, now 19, was courting a young woman from a neighboring ranch and talking about building his own cabin on a corner of their property. Grace, at 17, showed no interest in marriage yet, preferring to work alongside her father managing the cattle. James, at 14, was already showing signs of brilliance, talking about maybe going to college to study engineering. Ruth, at 9, was still the peacemaker of the family, with her gentle nature and gift for growing things. "We did well," Marcus said, taking Helena's hand. "We did," Helena agreed. "Though there were times I was not sure we would make it." "Never doubted it for a moment," Marcus said with a smile. "Well, maybe a few moments, but you were always so certain, so determined. Your faith carried us through." Helena leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Not just my faith, our partnership, the fact that we faced everything together." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land, painting the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Helena thought about that young woman she had been, standing in the town square being mocked for her beliefs. She had been so alone then, so desperate to prove that her faith mattered. She had learned since then that faith was not about proving anything to anyone. It was about having a foundation to stand on when life became difficult, about choosing hope over despair, about loving others even when they did not love you back. It was about building a life of meaning and purpose, not through grand gestures but through small daily choices. And she had learned that strength came in many forms. The strength to stand alone when necessary, but also the strength to accept help when it was offered. The strength to maintain your principles, but also the strength to show grace when others failed. The strength to work hard, but also the strength to rest and allow yourself to be loved. Marcus had seen that strength in her when no one else had. He had admired it, nurtured it, built a life alongside it. And in return, she had helped him find his own strength, had shown him that he was worthy of love and capable of creating something lasting. Their love story had started with mockery and a cowboy's defense, but it had grown into something far richer and more complex than either could have imagined. It was built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine partnership. It had weathered hardship and celebrated triumph. It had created 4 children and a thriving ranch and a legacy of faith and integrity. As twilight settled over Hope Creek Ranch, Helena and Marcus went inside to join their children for supper. The house was filled with noise and laughter, with the beautiful chaos of a family that loved each other deeply. They gathered around the table, joining hands while Marcus said grace, thanking God for their many blessings. After the meal, as the children cleared dishes and began their evening chores, Helena and Marcus stepped back outside to enjoy the cool evening air. Stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. "You ever wish things had been different?" Helena asked. "That we had met some other way under easier circumstances?" Marcus considered the question seriously before shaking his head. "No. The hardship made us stronger. The mockery you endured showed me who you really were. If we had met at some church social or town dance, I might never have seen your true strength. Everything happened exactly as it needed to. I used to pray for God to change the hearts of the people who mocked me," Helena admitted. "I wanted them to see that my faith was valuable, that I was not foolish for believing. But now I realize that their mockery led me to you, and you led me to this life. So maybe those prayers were answered, just not in the way I expected." "God works in mysterious ways," Marcus said with a smile. "Yes, he does," Helena agreed, smiling back. In the years that followed, Hope Creek Ranch continued to be a place of love and purpose. Henry married his sweetheart in 1900 and built a cabin on the property, eventually taking over management of the horse breeding operation. Grace surprised everyone by falling in love with a schoolteacher who moved to the area in 1902, and they married the following year, with Grace continuing to work the ranch alongside her new husband, who proved more capable with cattle than anyone expected. James did go to college, studying engineering in Missoula and returning home each summer to help with the ranch. He eventually got a job with the railroad, but remained close to the family, visiting often with his own wife and children. Ruth married a local rancher in 1906 and established her own homestead nearby, creating beautiful gardens that became famous throughout the region. Helena and Marcus became grandparents many times over, their house often filled with visiting children and grandchildren. They remained active in their church and community, respected for their integrity and generosity. Helena continued her quilting circle until her hands became too arthritic to sew, and even then, she attended meetings to visit with the women who had become her dear friends. In 1918, when Helena was 61 and Marcus was 65, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a huge gathering at Hope Creek Ranch. All 4 children came with their families, along with friends and neighbors from throughout the region. It was a joyous celebration of a life built on faith and love and hard work. That evening, after the guests had departed and the grandchildren were tucked into various beds throughout the house, Helena and Marcus walked slowly out to their favorite spot overlooking the valley. Marcus's steps were slower now, his hair completely gray, but his eyes still held that quiet strength that had first attracted Helena. Helena herself had aged gracefully, her face lined but still beautiful, her faith still the foundation of everything she did. 40 years, Marcus said wonderingly. Hard to believe it has been that long. Best 40 years of my life, Helena replied, taking his hand. Mine too. Though I have to admit, there were moments in those early days when I wondered if we would make it. building this ranch from nothing, raising 4 children, dealing with drought and disease and all the rest. It was not easy. No, it was not easy, Helena agreed. But it was worth it. Every difficult moment led us to something better. That is what faith is really about, trusting that the hard times have purpose even when you cannot see it yet. Marcus pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her as they stood looking at the stars. "Your strength is still what I admire most," he said quietly. "After all these years, after everything we have been through, you remain the strongest person I know." Helena felt tears gather in her eyes, but they were happy tears, grateful tears. "And you remain the man who saw that strength when no one else did. You saved me that day in town, Marcus. Not just from mockery, but from a life of loneliness. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Marcus corrected. "That is how the best partnerships work." They stood together under the Montana stars, 2 people who had found each other against the odds and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. Their story had started with ridicule and contempt, but it had transformed into something beautiful and lasting. They had created a legacy not just in their children and grandchildren, but in the way they had lived, with integrity and faith and unconditional love. Helena thought about that young woman who had stood in the town square, clutching her Bible and refusing to back down despite the mockery. She had been so certain of her faith, but so uncertain of her place in the world. And then, Marcus Bennett had stepped out of the crowd and changed everything. He had seen her strength when she felt weakest. He had admired her faith when others ridiculed it. He had built a life with her that honored who she was rather than trying to change her. That was the greatest gift anyone could give another person, the gift of being truly seen and valued for exactly who they are. As they walked slowly back to the house, arm in arm, Helena offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the winding path that had brought her to this moment. The mockery she had endured had seemed like pure suffering at the time, but it had led her to Marcus, to Hope Creek Ranch, to a life richer than she had ever imagined possible. Their story was not a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real, built on genuine connection and mutual respect, tested by hardship and strengthened by love. It was a testament to the power of faith, not just in God but in each other, to transform 2 wounded, lonely people into partners who could create something beautiful together. Years later, long after both Helena and Marcus had passed peacefully into eternity, their descendants would gather at Hope Creek Ranch and tell stories about the remarkable couple who had built it all from nothing. They would talk about Helena's unwavering faith and Marcus's quiet strength. They would repeat the family legend about how they met, about mockery in a town square and a cowboy who stepped forward to defend a woman he did not know. And they would remember the words Marcus had spoken that first day, words that became a family motto passed down through generations. "Your strength is what I admire most." Because that, in the end, was the foundation of everything. 2 people who saw strength in each other and built a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. That was their story, and it was complete.